I definitely have a memory of the first times that music sort of really moved me, especially classical music. In my family, we didn't listen much to classical music at first. My father loved music, but he was sort of very much more into jazz or big band or so, which is wonderful. And I think through sort of my development, my parents also got more into the whole classical field. So it was really something new to discover for me. My uncle, who was a wonderful painter, he loved classical music, and he had a collection of, for example, the Mozart piano concertos. He loved Mozart, and that I remember then that, for example, the last Mozart concerto was one of the first things that really hit me, and that I kept listening over and over and over and over again to, because I found the music so miraculous and so wonderful. And at the same time, I also have recollections of listening to some pieces that I didn't understand yet, where I just thought, how can anybody like this? And a few years later, I thought, why couldn't I understand that? So I can really understand where people come from in any case, even when they are not so used to classical music. I can really understand where they come from, and how some things maybe also don't reach them yet, how some things maybe take time. Brahms took time for me. It took until I was sort of about 15 or 16 or so, until I really got into listening to Brahms and then also playing it. And then it was like a tidal wave coming at me. And I kept listening to his symphonies, to the piano concertos and the double concerto and chamber music, and over and over and over again. And especially this first piano concerto, long time before I actually played it, which was when I was 21, I think, 21. I kept listening to it, and I was always dreaming of playing it because I was so moved by it. I remember sitting in the train to my teacher at the time. I always had to travel for 3 hours to Hanover to get my lessons with Karl-Heinz Kämmerling in Hanover. And I had this little Walkman with tapes, and I had one tape with Brahms D minor concerto, and I remember these sometimes stormy, rainy travel days in Germany, and the melancholic feeling that sort of came over me with just letting this music sort of go through me, and this feeling of this unbelievable drama that is in this piece. In the concerto, often there is at least a bit of an idea of showing off the possibilities of the instrument, of the virtuosity of the player or so. It is a very hard piano concerto. It has its virtuosic bits, but he refrains from all that completely. It's always serving a bigger purpose of an incredibly strong musical and emotional statement. In the first movement, mainly a statement of unbelievable despair and fear. I mean, this first opening of the orchestra is probably the most dramatic and fearful opening that has ever been written, with the timpani starting the piece. And he writes, even technically, he writes something into the piano part, an octave trill that sort of never. I don't know any other composer who has done that really, and it's such an expression of unbelievable despair when it happens. So it's a technical difficulty, but portraying an emotional state. Then the second movement is a chorale full of inner peace and beauty, definitely with strong connection to Bach. It's a feeling of religioso, of religious extent, I think, of belief, of a belief in a fate, in a hopefully good fate. Also in the first movement, in the second theme, we have something like that a bit as well. And these religious moments are like the moments of sunlight in all the darkness that is in the piece. So it's a deeply psychological piece that really has a line from the first note, from this horrible opening of despair, to the sunrise that happens just after the last cadenza, then, or after the cadenza in the last movement, and when it finally goes to D major. That's when sort of this, for the first time, really all the smoke is lifting somehow, and the sun comes through. A little bit like in the pastorale, the happy and grateful feelings after the storm. Brahms is more about natural laws, about bigger developments, about a wheel getting into a movement, and once it's moving, it can't be stopped, and then it can only slowly slow down again and could go into another thing. Beethoven is more about the human force and what the human can do, how it can interrupt something and put a revolution in the way that it erupts, or that it sort of suddenly becomes really quiet. The subito character in Beethoven is so important. Of course, Brahms has things like that as well, but it's more in bigger developments, and that's maybe the major difference. In a way, one could say, it's just a thought that I have just now, I was going to say, in a way, Brahms has more fate in it, of things that are just have to happen. But then, of course, Beethoven also, there's a strong sense of fate, but it's a different interpretation of fate.